we're going to get going. As I said, today we're going to concentrate on the critical thinking skills and incorporating critical appraisal into your writing. We're going to be talking about critical thinking. We're going to be seeing if we can identify where something's critical and where it's descriptive, and ways of being critical. So different ways that you can be critical in your writing. And then if we've got time, we'll do an exercise where we take a look at your assignments, but I might have to leave that for you to do at home. Okay, to start with, what I want to do is just talk to you about some of the terms that you might find in your assignment questions. So synthesis, critical analysis, critical evaluation, and critiquing. Are these terms that you have encountered? If you're doing the leadership one, I think you find critiquing as a term. I wanted to talk about what they mean so that you've got an idea of what it is that you're being asked to do. Does anyone have any idea what synthesis is? What you're being asked to do if you're asked to synthesize the literature? Sorry? Drawing together is absolutely right. Synthesis. No worries. Can you swipe in if you're able? Synthesis is probably the most uncontroversial term in terms of the critical thinking words. It means bringing things together. Think of it, if you synthesize something in a lab, you synthesize penicillin, you're taking the chemicals that are there, you're bringing them together to create something new. That's basically what synthesizing the literature is as well. So you're bringing elements of the literature together, you're using that for your argument, to create your argument. And if you're being asked to do a literature review, for example, so people who've done the EDRIP module will already have been asked to write a literature review. You're bringing the pieces of literature together, the research that's in an area, and you're painting a picture. You're painting the whole picture, and you're showing how they compare, how they contrast, what they're contributing to a particular research area. So you're looking at things as a whole. So that's synthesizing the literature. Any idea what critical analysis is asking you to do? This is, we'll try and get to the official definitions of what is it that you're being asked to do if you're being asked to critically analyze.
Look at the strengths and weaknesses.
Look at strengths and weaknesses. That's actually any ideas about the strengths and weaknesses where that would fit in? That's actually usually evaluation. So if you evaluate, you're weighing things up and looking at strengths and weaknesses. Analysis normally involves pulling something apart to really see what it's made of, really to get a better understanding. What are the elements that are involved, and looking at each individual element. Also in terms of implications as well. Do you know what I mean when I say an implication? If you've got, say, hi, can you come in and swipe in as you come? If you have, say, a policy document, do you know what I mean when I say look at the implications of the policies? What do I mean by that?
Recommendation for practice.
Okay, so it might be how to put it into practice. It's what results from this. So say there's a policy, when you look at it, you can say, wow, if we put this policy into practice, that's going to cost an awful lot of money. That's an implication. What can result from this? But also, what are the implications for practice? It might also mean that we need an awful lot more people on the ground. We might need more staff. That would be an implication. So what are the results that would follow from this is an implication. So critical analysis is looking at things more deeply. Evaluation is where we look at strengths and weaknesses. And critiquing, any idea about critiquing? Any idea what that means?
The quality of the available literature.
Look at the quality of the available literature. Yeah, critiquing is probably the woolliest term in terms of critical thinking. It can really involve both. So let me just do a quick official definition of these terms. So we've got synthesis is that drawing together of the literature, painting a picture of the whole. You might, to synthesize things, to bring things together, you might compare and contrast. You might discuss literature under the kind of main points that have arisen, things that people have been talking about. Maybe you've read lots of studies and each one of them talks about a need for education. So education might be one of the ways that you can bring literature together. But it's drawing it together to create an argument. Critical analysis officially is that breaking down into component parts. You might find links to other literature and with practice, and you might identify the things that can result from that literature, so that's the implications. And evaluation, evaluation is looking at the strengths and weaknesses. It's really important actually though that when you think about, okay, I'm going to assess the strengths and weaknesses, you also remember to say why, because the why part is really the critical part. So for example, let's say you've looked at a study and you've had a look and you think, hang on a minute, there's only 3 participants in this study, that's not very many people. That's a problem. So you want to say the study has a flaw, it's got just 3 participants. So you've pointed out the weakness there, but you haven't said why it's a weakness. You haven't explained to your lecturer why. And when you're at master's level, you actually can't leave your lecturer to fill in the gaps for you. So you've got to put in the why it's a weakness. So maybe then what you need to do is you need to go, not being an expert in study design, you need to go to a book that talks about designing studies and get someone to back you up about why that's a problem, that 3 is actually too small to be able to get any meaningful results. You'd have to find a reference for that one. Okay, so explaining why after you've explained a strength or a weakness is a really important thing to remember. You can also, if you found those implications, the things that result by critically analysing, you can talk about the strengths and weaknesses of those implications. So if you found that something's going to cost a lot of money, you might want to talk about how that's a problem and why that's a problem. So always, again, explaining why. So critiquing, again, as I said, that's the kind of woolliest term, but it incorporates both analysis and evaluation. It kind of means use your critical thinking skills. So you might very well be looking at the quality of the literature, but you would also have to analyse it. The thing to remember is that although these terms have got kind of official definitions, they quite often get used interchangeably. And that if a lecturer only uses one of those terms, for example, if you're asked to critically analyse the recent policy that's come out, you can bet that they will actually want you to do some evaluation as well. So if you have found that an implication of the policy is that it will cost loads and loads of money, they're not going to want you to just leave it there. They're going to want you to say why that's a problem. That's a problem with why. So really, if you just see one of these terms, you are still probably being asked to use all of your critical thinking skills. So looking closely at things, looking for implications, looking at strengths and weaknesses, looking at what would result from them. Okay, so what does critical writing involve? Well, it involves incorporating all of those things, all of the above. Have you, for those people who've been here, for whom it's not their first trimester, have you got a piece of feedback from an assignment where perhaps there's a bit that says, this bit's a bit too descriptive? That's quite a common comment to get, a bit too descriptive here. So it's really important, if you're going to incorporate critical appraisal into your writing, that you understand the difference between descriptive writing and writing that is critical. And the difference is this: descriptive writing explains what's being said. Critical writing tells us what you think about what's being said and why. Okay, so it's critical if it's about what's being said. So if I'm looking at that study again, if I just write about that study and I say, the study sought to investigate blah blah blah, the researchers interviewed 3 participants and they found the following results. What I've done is I've talked to you about what's being said. I've explained what's in the article. That's describing what's in the article, so that's descriptive. But if I now go on to say the study has a serious flaw, 3 participants is too small a number, and here's why you're not going to get really good results from this, then what I'm doing is now talking about what's being said, and now I'm being critical. Okay? It doesn't have to just be me who talks about it either. So I might have noticed that there's only 3 participants, and then I've gone and found some resources, some references to back up my argument for why it's not very good. Or maybe I've read somebody else and they've pointed out that, you know, that study that Peters did, well, it's got a problem because it's only got 3 participants. I can use that. I can use their reference as long as I, cite the person. That will still count as critical because it's still talking about that original study. So that would still count as critical. I might go on to explain why it's a problem still and add some more of my own explanation to that. So it could be another author has pointed this out, or it could actually be the author themselves. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you have a look at some studies, you'll find that in the discussion section, the authors of studies talk about the limitations of their research. So they're giving you for free, here's some things you can say about the weaknesses. This is a limitation. So if you talk about those in your assignment, you can say that the author points out that his study has a weakness. So Phillips, 2011, points out that the study has the following limitation, blah, 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 blah. You can go on and explain why, and that still counts as critical because you're talking about the study. Okay, here's the important thing about being critical in your work and incorporating that criticality within your writing. Being critical involves asking why and how questions and not just what questions. The what questions will get you the description. So what questions will get you what was the study about, what was the number of participants, what were the findings, and that gives you description. But the how and the why questions will get you the critical. So, for example, there are different moves that you can make to be critical. You could give examples, and that shows how, let's say you're looking at some theory, how that could be applied. So you could give examples, you could give explanations, so give more explanation, explain how this works in detail. You could draw some comparisons. So let's say you've got not just one study, but you've got 2 studies. You can talk about how they are similar or how they are dissimilar, and maybe even why. So say you've got 2 studies that are investigating the same thing, but they've actually they've got completely different findings. So you could talk about how they are different, and then you could think about why they're different. Maybe if you look very closely, the cohorts are different, the participants are different, and that might explain it. If you find an explanation, you need to make sure that when you're writing, you're quite tentative about it. Unless you've got absolute concrete evidence for why this is different, you need to put it in terms of the difference might be explained by, so using more tentative words. Unless it's absolutely clear what the difference is. Okay, providing more evidence is another way to be critical. so is considering alternative viewpoints or approaches. So what do other people do? Here's an intervention. Is this the only intervention? What do other people recommend? Here's a theory that tries to explain a particular phenomenon. Is it the only theory? Are there different viewpoints? What are the strengths of those theories? What are the weaknesses? So discussing strengths and weaknesses and explaining why, also critical, and making links to practice. Just to make sure, I did have a little example that I want to go through actually, just to make sure that we're all on the right track. I want to, with this exercise, I want you to tell me which sentences are descriptive and which sentences are critical. So perhaps if we just all do one together and then we can go back to this. If you take a look at that paragraph there, I might make it a little bit clearer. Read the paragraph, tell me which sentences are descriptive and which bits are critical and how are they critical. So where's the description, would you say?
The first is descriptive.
The first sentence?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just talking about the model, isn't it? And it's describing the medical model. So then what happens? What would you say there in that next sentence?
Explain more about the descriptive, about the model.
Okay. And what are they saying about the model? Are they making any judgments about it?
The strength of the model.
Okay, so to start with, we're saying it's considered successful in treating these conditions. So that could be thought of as a strength, although we don't have particularly why. What's happening in the second part? However,
The demerits.
the demerits, the weakness. Okay, so we've got a weakness as well. So that second part of that last sentence is outlining a weakness. What about if we go on to this? Take a look at that paragraph. Tell me what that's doing.
Compares.
It's comparing, or what would you say? It's
The medical model.
okay. We've got the medical model, and this is what?
Psychosocial.
It's a different model. So what's it doing in terms of
Like a
being
contrast.
contrasting, or it's presenting an alternative? Because we're not exactly saying what's different about it yet. So we're presenting an alternative viewpoint. Yep. We've presented an alternative viewpoint, so that whole paragraph in a way is quite critical. But is there any description in there? Yeah, it tells you about the model. So the first part of that is descriptive. It's telling you about the model. Then what's it doing? Is there any critical?
Say why. It says it in aspect of saying that it says why.
Yeah. So it's pointing out a strength and saying why. Okay. Okay. What I would like to do is I would like you to have a look at some paragraphs which contain both descriptive writing and critical writing. So I want you to practice your analytical skills here by seeing if you can see which bits are descriptive and which bits are critical in the paragraphs that I'm handing out. And not just which bits are critical, but in what way are they critical? How are they critical? So what are those critical moves that the authors are making? What are we talking about here? We're talking about the correction. Correct. Okay. Good. Okay. Okay. I think I've seen just about everyone talking about the first example. Could we talk about the second one together? So what have you found? Was there any description in the second one?
Yes.
Yes? Where?
First part of the first sentence.
First part, oh, there we go. First part of the first sentence is descriptive. Yep. Okay, so we're talking about the approach that was used and what they did. They used a random control trial, and then we go on to do what?
To evaluate the strength.
To talk about a strength, yeah, saying that the random control trials are fabulous, and providing a little bit of evidence for that as well. So that's pointing out a strength. What does the author do in the second part of the paragraph?
The weakness
Talks about a weakness.
and the reason for that.
Okay, because the results aren't generalizable. Because of that sample size. Okay, so we've got a weakness. And then at the end of that paragraph, the author talks about that the authors of the study suggest further research is warranted. Sorry? A recommendation or an implication? A recommendation for further research. Okay, good. Okay, before I go on, I just want to touch base with something. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page about how you go about your assignments to make sure that your approach is a critical approach. So asking you this question, which sometimes gets the answer yes. When you have an assignment to do you take the approach of, yes, I know what the answer is, and now I'm going to go and find some evidence to back me up? Or do you look at some research and let the research tell you what your answer is? Which way would you normally go, would you say?
First one.
First one?
When I started the master, I was first one. Now I'm
Okay,
into the
when you
second.
started to the masters, you were more of the first one, and now you're the second one. Okay, let me tell you that to save the people who've just started some pain, it's the second one that we really need you to be doing at master's level, to take a critical approach, because that first one can lead you to a very lopsided argument. You won't be seeing the full picture. We need you to get a clear understanding of an area of study, and then to let the research tell you what the answer is. That's the kind of nature of research, is that you might have an idea of what the answer is going to be, but you actually have to let the evidence tell you what that answer is. So go for the second one, and that will increase your chances of giving a very well-rounded answer, and an answer that actually reflects what's going on in the research. Here are our examples of ways that we can be critical again. What I would like to do now, we've just been through the exercise of having a look at some writing and seeing where it's descriptive and where it's critical and how it's critical. I want us to go through a different exercise now, where what we're going to do is look at some writing and think about how it could be more critical. So I'm going to give you some different examples now. Take a look at those examples. Have a chat with your neighbour or in a group of three. This works best as a team effort. Thinking about how could these things be more critical. So if you were writing these paragraphs, what could you do to be more critical? Can we have a chat together about this one? What would you say would make the first one? So that's C on the page. What would you say? Because we've got around to you guys. What would you say would make that first one better?
There's no source there.
Okay, so we don't have any references, and we need references, and we need
the background,
We
the
need-
theory,
Okay.
explanation of the model.
We need an explanation of a model, so we need a model that we might be working from, and we need what else?
Why the model may work in practice.
Okay, why it may work in practice, the evidence for it, the evidence for that working in practice. Okay, good. Okay, what about the second one? What did you think in terms of the second one? What could improve it in terms of it being more critical?
The strength is there, the evidence is there, but there's no full explanation.
Okay, so we need more from the second one. Certainly, they've used some references. We certainly need more from that. So we're talking about key studies in first, and then possibly just one study. So we need to talk about some more if you're going to talk about key studies. What does that, the Akri et al., what do we need here to make it more critical? More explanation.
No weakness.
We need to look at the strengths and the weaknesses of that particular study. If what we're talking about is the independence of older people, what else might we look at perhaps further down in the assignment? We've looked at exercise. Could we look at anything else? We could look at other viewpoints. There might be other ways of increasing independence. So we look at alternative viewpoints as well, different ways of doing it. Okay, we could, if we're looking at studies, we can see if there are any studies that have findings that contradict this study. We can see if there are other studies that corroborate the study. Okay, and finally, what about for E? What have we got there?
It's maybe descriptive, but they could actually, because this is the blend, they could actually make that strength.
Talk about why that's a strength. Yes. Okay. At the moment, E is just description, but it could easily be turned into talking about the strength of what it is to have a double-blinded study, and you could certainly go into the other aspects of it as well. Okay, that's good. For those of you who haven't yet done EDRIP, or who need to look at studies and evaluations of studies, there's a really good website that the NHS has. So if you get onto the NHS, I think it's nhs.uk/news, you've got a website that's set up for the general public, so you can't use this as an academic source. But what they've done, the NHS, is they look at studies that have been reported in the newspaper, and they go to the actual original studies. So these are academic studies that are published in journals, and they critique them, or they critically analyse them and evaluate them. So they will look at the kinds of things that look at the kind of study it is, the number of participants, the results they found, the discussions. So they look at the kinds of things that you would need to look at if you are looking at studies. So if you're not practiced at this, having a look at that site and seeing the kinds of things that they say is a good way of becoming acquainted with the kinds of things that you can talk about in terms of the studies. You won't be able to use this as an academic source in your assignments because it's set up for the general public. But you can certainly get an idea of what the kinds of things are that you can say, and if there is a study that relates to what you are looking at, you can go to the original and you can have a look at what you would want to say about it. But it's quite a good way of getting into practice about that. Okay, are there any questions from today? No? So shall we leave it there? Alrighty, thanks very much.
Thank you.